Here we look at the 10-mark question with an item and then an answer outlining what it is that the examiners are looking for. Since we've already looked at the key skills for the 10-mark applying material from item A, analyse 2, in general terms, we'll only briefly recap on that before moving on to a specific example of a question and answer. If you'd like more information on the skills in general for this question, then please see the previous video. Remember, these are the rules for this type of question that you can use across all three papers. The content that you're examined on will obviously vary from paper to paper, but the skills are exactly the same. Hence, these are the general requirements. Press pause if you need to remind yourself of what those are. Although the example here is from paper 1, this is how the question looks, and it gives you an idea of how long the answer should be. This represents two separate pieces of A4 paper, and as always, if you want to go beyond that, then you can do within the time constraints, but you need to signify to the examiner that you need additional paper. Remember, the first type of 10-mark question that asks you to outline and explain 2 has no item, but this one does. And so you must make use of that in your answer. Hence the command, as stated, is applying material from item, in this case C. The first thing I want you to do in the exam is to read the question very carefully, as always, taking account of every specific word, any plurals and so on. So do that now, pressing pause if necessary as you read what the question is asking you to do. The second thing to do is identify the two parts of the question. For this question, you must bring together aspects of your sociological knowledge by linking the two different parts of the question. Therefore, having read the question, the next thing to do is to identify the two parts. In doing that, we can recognise that after the command instructions, the first part of the question here, in this particular example, is demographic trends. So think of the material that you're aware of with regards to demographic trends in the families and households module. That is how our population has changed with regards to its size, shape and structure, and how that has changed over time. The second part of the question relates to the nature of childhood. The requirement of such a question is demanding here because you have to recognise this. In other words, how do demographic trends relate or link to the nature of childhood in the UK today? In other words, that's two different parts of the specification, but they're being brought together in this one question. Look at the mark scheme for this particular type of 10-mark question. The easiest way to ensure that you go into the bottom mark band is to make no reference to the item. I don't want to spend too much time here, and nor do you. This is where most answers fall across the country, and that is 4 to 7 marks. Looking through this, you'll see the word some mentioned a fair bit. There's some application, some analysis, and this suggests that the answer is okay, but needs to be doing a bit more. It should also be said that answers where one hook is developed is good, hook development is good, but the second is much weaker. They fall into this category. So you could do one very well, applied with good knowledge, evaluation, analysis and so on, and potentially score 7 marks. That's rare though. In the top mark band, 8 to 10 marks, which is where you're aiming, you'll notice that basic becomes good. That is good knowledge, good understanding. Some successful application becomes 2 developed applications of material from the item, and some analysis becomes appropriate analysis. The higher marks in this band will have an explanation of 2 ways well applied with analysis evaluation. Lower marks in this band will have 1 of the ways with more limited application analysis evaluation. You have some examples of ways in which you could answer the question here, but we'll look at this in much more detail. Given that we've just seen what we've just seen about the two parts of this question and the mark scheme, it is vital that we're using the item in our response. Therefore, in the exam, for any practice questions as well, you must carefully read the item and think very carefully about which parts of the item you're going to use in your answer. Remember, as per the question, you need two, in this case, ways. Therefore, you should be looking for two separate and different parts of the item that you could potentially develop. As stated here, you must decide which two specific sections you're going to use, and your answer takes a format similar to this. And once you've done that, you need a second and different quote for the second paragraph, which develops a second, in this case, way. This isn't always going to be the case for every item and every question, but for this one it works. So here is a thought. You have to select two quotes. In this particular example that we're looking at, there are only 3 sentences, and I don't think the first one is telling us much. So that leaves here 2 of the more obvious hooks which have been highlighted. It is advised that you start each of your 2 paragraphs with a quoted statement from the item and then develop it to answer the specific question. In this model answer by a student called Judy, we can see that she's identified the part of the item that she's going to use to answer the question. She's made it clear to the examiner, and she has used quotation marks. She now needs to develop this quote specifically to help answer the question. Remember to link the first part of the question to the second. That is, we need to link the demographic trend, in this case, to the nature of childhood in the United Kingdom today, but also note this bit, since 1900. Going back to our general rules list then, she now needs to develop the answer further with reference to things like sociological concepts or sociological evidence. And here we can see a development of this hook and the start of an application to childhood. So this is the next part of her response. Here we can see the development continues via the findings of the study, and in this case we've also got the use of a concept, as highlighted above in pink and then green. So having done that, the next step is to explain and develop this point. Again, here we can see the use of a concept, in this case the child-centred family. And this is developed and explained further. We can see a clear link back to the time frame of 1900. As I said, be careful with these sorts of questions and acknowledge the historical context. 1900 means that anything about industrialisation is not going to score because that's pre-1900. This last sentence provides us with a good example of what is referred to as in-context evaluation. That is, it's not learnt or bolt-on, but it's explicitly relevant in the context of this question. If you need to press pause then, do so now and have a read of this first full paragraph. Note there's no introduction to this question. The answer is in the form of 2 paragraphs, and this is the first paragraph. It starts exactly like this in Judy's exam response. This is her second paragraph. Here we can see that Judy is using a second quote from the item. Also note the way that she introduces this with a clear signpost to the examiner of a second way. She's using the clear wording of also states. This is simple but effective, and again it gets the examiner thinking that they're on the right track. As before, you need to develop a second way. In this case it's different, so that's fine. If the first paragraph was about positive benefits, in this case what she's done is something about the drawbacks and the nature of childhood maybe not being so good. This is of course just an idea, as seen here in Judy's response. You could do 2 ways in which it's improved. It's not essential that you do one good and one bad. It really doesn't matter, but for the sake of this model answer, she has done one in the first paragraph that's quite positive, and this one perhaps focusing on the things which are a bit negative. So she started with the people now having fewer children. That's your demographic trend. She now needs to make that relevant to the nature of childhood in the United Kingdom today. And she does that, as we can see here in the next development of this paragraph, by using the findings from one of Frank Ferrudi's studies. So she develops this a bit further to say why and how people having fewer children, that's the demographic trend, is affecting the nature of childhood in the United Kingdom today. So she's using Ferrudi's arguments about how it's changing how children experience the world in which they live. So you can see more detail here. Again, another way of developing your answer is to use an example, and that's what she's doing here. She's doing the example of children used to were able to walk to school on their own independently, but now that's much less so. And that's directly from Farudi's study. And again, she's gone for a different study, different finding, a similar vein though, the negative experiences of these changes in childhood. She talks about the toxic childhood. And again, you can see here some further development with some what we referred to as in-context evaluation. Again, if you need to press pause, then please do so, but have a look at this. This is her second paragraph with regards to this specific question that's asked. Taken together, these two paragraphs make up Judy's answer. As I said before, there's no need for an introduction. Doesn't score, takes up time, therefore there's no need to do it. No need for a conclusion. Again, doesn't score, doesn't give you any more marks. What's the point in doing it? There isn't any. So this is exactly how Judy's answer appears in response to this question. We're assuming it's under exam conditions, which is 15 minutes for a 10-mark question. These two paragraphs are what she's written. As I said, have a look at both of these together. That's what you're required to do for this question. Key things, as we've said, with regards to the general rules. We're spending 15 minutes on that, 7.5 minutes on each paragraph. That's what the exam board, when I say that I mean this, is expecting you to do within that time. She's used the item by selecting a hook or quote, and that is the launch pad for answering the question. We've got examples of sociological concepts. We've got examples of actual examples to support those points. We've got evidence, findings from studies. Theories and theorists weren't necessarily as necessary in this question, so not included, but in some questions they will be. What's really good about this, we've got clear links to the question showing how and why what the student is saying is relevant. We call this the developed chain of reasoning. With regards to overall response to this question then, I feel that there's a possibility, it's a good answer, however, I feel that possibly we could see a bit more development with regards to the first paragraph. There's potential for a little bit more detail. Hence, overall, this scores 8 out of 10. Press pause now and think about what advice you would offer Judy to help her develop that point, or what points you would use yourself. Otherwise, please take note of what we see here, which is successful use of the correct framework to produce her response, one that you should be aiming for with practice under exam conditions.